Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here on a Sunday. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces. I'm Jennifer Wester. I'm the gallery director at Notre Dame of Maryland University. And I just want to welcome you to this conversation, one in a series of virtual conversations we're having with the artists that are exhibiting and are looking at leadership exhibitions curated by Sarah McCann. Hopefully by now you've either seen the show in person or checked it out on the website, but I invite you to do that during or after today's conversation as well, as I'm sure some of the ideas that get discussed will make you want to reconsider some of the artworks as well, thinking about these themes of leadership. And so I just wanted to welcome you and give a quick introduction and then turn it over to Sarah McCann, our curator for this show, who will introduce the artists, and then we'll start talking about cultivating leadership and the role of art in that process. So Sarah?
Yep. Hi, I'm Sarah McCann. I'm the guest curator at Notre Dame. I just want to say thank you to Jennifer and thank you to everybody in Notre Dame for making this happen, and to the artists for bringing the idea for this panel. So this exhibition came to be in the middle of the pandemic while we were also working from home, and we had some semblance of an idea that it would go on the wall, but not what would be happening as far as being able to see it in person. So we're delighted to be able to provide these Zoom programs. And today we have Gina Pierleoni, Ken Krafchek, Sarah Kaltwasser, and Raul Rene Gonzalez to talk about cultivating leadership, what that looks like in their practice as artists and the rest of the ways it kind of impacts their life. So we're going to take a couple minutes to have each of the artists introduce themselves and talk a little bit about the theme and what interested them about it. I think we're going to get started with Ken Krafchek. So Ken. Oh, Ken, you're muted.
I'm practicing before I actually speak to you all. It's great to see you. Wish we were in the same room together. My little intro here is, first of all, some of you may know that I direct for a little while longer, the MFA in Community Arts at MICA. I've been doing that for 15 years, and I have some thoughts about leadership, of course, because our program is very much about leadership. So a few little thoughts. When I was in my MFA, we were asked to talk about when I was studying who we are and what we were as artists. So what I came up with, and this was 20 years ago, and what changed my life was that artists make connections between the seemingly disparate, build harmonious relationships, and lift up hidden meaning. By this definition, the artist's true powers are transcendent, applicable to both canvas and the world at large. That statement opened up any number of doors that had been shut and that I was not even aware of and didn't know how to enter. So some other thoughts, artists as leaders, and I would add as teachers, which is what the MFA is heavily grounded in, artists who teach in a variety of ways and in different contexts, different formats to various ends. So my thoughts are that every piece of visual or creative stimulus is a message advocating for this or that. There is no benign messaging. In fact, there is no non-messaging. If all art or design promotes certain messages and ideas, mores and values, we can readily accept the notion that art teaches. Each piece of art, its own textbook of study. If so, what does art teach and to what end? Where does this teaching lead us, each of us a student?
Hello.
If we are being led somewhere by this artist slash teacher slash leader, what are the rules of engagement? All leaders are imbued with certain powers, consciously or unconsciously applied, and with them come related responsibilities. One responsibility, depending on moral, ethical, political, or other beliefs, is to one's own position of power as a leader. Do we really own our power as artist, teacher, leader? Do we acknowledge, plan, and prepare accordingly? And with that thought, I'll pass it back to Sarah, who will pass it on to someone else.
Thank you, Ken. Gina, would you like to share next? You are also muted.
I am.
Oh, you're still muted.
Unmute. Got it. Yes. All right. I guess my ideas about leadership probably stem more from personal experiences. I've always been fascinated with who gets to lead. I think springing from a household with 6 brothers and like an immigrant style, old school, the guys do everything and the women make it think like, the women can encourage the guys to think it was their idea seemed so unfair to me, like just so unfair. And so the idea of leadership, I was always so resentful about it because there wasn't an opportunity, or I didn't think there was, for me to participate in that. And so my style of leadership has grown into more of an invitation to help other people lead themselves and to collectively lead. I think leadership is super exciting. It's creative, it's unknown. And certainly in the time of COVID, it's all brand new because none of us have done this before. So yeah, so here we are, we're leading by showing up, we're collectively leading. Thanks.
Thank you, Gina. Sarah?
Thank you. I've always thought of leadership as, I think we always have these like kind of larger than life ideas about what a leader can be, especially because of the nature of political leadership or, leadership in kind of larger institutions. But for me, leadership has been kind of like the kind of everyday acts that I get to witness, whether it's in a classroom with a coworker or just somebody doing something very kind for someone else and that they may not know. So I think I've always come from the perspective that while leadership can happen on this grand scale, that it's possible for anybody to be a leader. And no matter how old they are or what their role is in any given situation, that we all have the possibilities of leadership. So that's kind of where I come from in that regard. It's short but sweet kind of response. Quiet leadership, everyday access to leadership.
And Raul, if you want to introduce yourself with just a couple words about the theme of the talk. Open, you're muted.
Okay, so just a couple words about leadership, you say, everyone's saying? Sure, so hi everybody, sorry for being late first. But I guess when I think about leadership, I think about it in all sort of different ways. Just based in my own experiences, I think leadership for me has come like first and foremost by being a stay-at-home parent and like raising 2 little girls, doing a lot of stuff with them. But at the same time, I think through my artwork, in a way, it has sort of prepared me to take on leadership. I think like as artists, we make work without really thinking about what the return response will be. And I feel like a lot of my work, since I've started making work or showing work publicly since about 2008, is I've had all these conversations with artists and dialogues that just keep happening. And then people coming to me and asking me for like advice and questions. So in a way, it's like the leadership spotlight just kind of started shining on me. And I feel like I had to grab onto that and just take it and own up to it and just use, whatever platform and also, my abilities to be able to like help others, work with others, and just grow from that and allow, I guess, leadership to kind of change as I grow and change, and allow whatever different types of leadership I need to use to kind of just rise to the occasion, I'll say.
Thank you. So I've got some questions prepared, but for those joining us today, if you've got questions as we go, please feel free to put them in the chat, or we'll have some time at the end. And artists, we'll look at doing this a little bit more conversational, so please just jump in as you feel moved as we go through the questions. So the first is, what are the values of those who have inspired you with their leadership, and how do you carry forward their wisdom and teaching in your life?
I don't mind going first. So, you know, one of my first, oh my goodness, like major leader that impacted me. I was little, I was less than 10 years old, and I had occasion to meet Willis Reed, who was the center of the New York Knicks. And I idolized this guy. So 6'10", oh my goodness, center for the New York Knicks, like my home team. And so anyway, I had occasion to meet him, and, you know, there were all kinds of people buzzing around him and stuff. And he looked at me and he picked me up so that I was face to face with him. And that whole notion of being face to face with somebody who was 6'10", I didn't know at the time, but my teaching and the way that I practice leadership really involves a lack of hierarchy, so that we're looking, you know, across from one another. And one other woman who has been, I mean, there's so many people I could name, but another woman, Angela Arian, who she's passed now, but a cultural anthropologist. There were several things that she talked about that again impact leadership, I think broader than me, but me specifically. One is, you know, she said it's important to ask whether you're problem-oriented or solution-oriented. And just having those two places to balance is really super, super clarifying. And then the other thing that she said, which was super helpful, is that all situations where change is happening have creative tension. You know, we see that in our artistic practice, of course, where we're not sure where to go next, but we also see it in leadership. And that creative tension is really important to hold and to not hurry through, because that's where all the juicy ideas come from. So yeah, you know, and she would say, if you can't think of 10 solutions to any problem right off the bat, you're not being creative enough.
Earl, Ken, Sarah, you all want to add anything?
Good. It's a good question. It's making me think. And quite honestly, I don't have a single person popping into my mind. And not that there aren't leaders out there, but I guess I gravitate toward sort of the non-leaders, or the question of when do we all lead? So I'm interested in that gap between moving forward and not, and who's doing their part toward healthy change. If I were to list names of leaders, they would probably be more in the religious or spiritual realm.
So I can't think of anybody specifically, but just want, like, I guess growing up, I didn't have most of the leaders that I often saw or associated leadership with often came in sports teams, and it wasn't usually like the best player on the team, but it was always like not even necessarily a team. Like, I didn't play sports at all. Like, growing up, I just never got a chance to play any sports. But watching sports, I just always liked how certain players are the ones that bring the team together. They're the ones that make every other team player better. They you know, they comfort players when they're down. They help lift them up. They give them strategy. And so I've seen that in sports, and I've seen that too just in the art world with like certain friends. Like, I have a friend, an artist named Robert Hodge in Houston. He's like he's a peer. He's about my age, but when I see him working, I see him constantly building younger artists up, helping them show their work, teaching them things, and like working with a lot of people, like working with a lot of people in his community, no matter what stage they are in their career. And I think that is really important as a part of leadership, is not just, you know, being a leader, but being able to share your knowledge and with as any way possible, and like allowing others to feel like they're like how Gina was saying, when that basketball player picked her up to her level. It's like the same thing, like making everybody seem like you're on the same playing field. That way, nobody feels like, I don't know, that way we can all understand each other's struggles. We could always understand each other's successes, and hopefully learn something from that.
Mhm.
To kind of like jump off what you were saying, like this idea of like lifting people up, or like giving oneself to like share the passion of the work that may be being done. I think that the people that have always stood out as examples to me, and I can't necessarily pick a singular person, but it's not because there's not a person in my mind. There's just many people in my mind, and so I think like in that way, the thing that unites a lot of those folks is that they are giving of themselves. They have a passion for the work, and that passion is contagious, and they loop everybody else into that passion. And I think also the people that have stood out as leaders to me and have been people that are also not afraid to ask like critical questions, and to look at, not about looking at both sides of something, but saying like, what is the question that we need to ask to move forward, to be better, to grow in whatever we're doing, or even just ask ourselves so that we can, I don't know if being successful is the right word, but just expand in how we engage as humans with one another.
Awesome, thank you all. So how do you, excuse me, looking at the wrong thing. How have your ideas about leadership changed during COVID?
I can go again. Nobody's led in COVID before. When we got started in the beginning of this, the old style of leadership, and I think about it being more like pyramids, with whoever the top dog is up there, and then the rest of us somehow at the base. There wasn't, in addition to there not being good leadership, nobody had led in this kind of situation before. And I think about one of the gifts of COVID, and there are, along with the hardship, there are many gifts. That vacuum of leadership really invited all kinds of other people to come in, younger people, diverse people, just all kinds of people to come in and do small scale leadership acts. Like Sarah's talking about, but then also come together as groups because we were missing each other so much. I think that when we look back on this, we'll see that the median age for leadership dropped during COVID, and it's not that middle agers and agers are aging out, but there's a wave of new leadership. And for me, it's like, thank God you've arrived. I say to my students, you're the ones we've been waiting for. Thank God you arrived.
I think since I come from the community arts field, I think community arts or arts in general or envisioning or creativity is like society or cultural first aid kits. Individuals who are primed and ready to walk into the unknown under enormous stress and see something positive with great potential, and we'll step forward. So COVID's not good, but there have been other pandemics and any numerous infinite numbers of wars and catastrophes through human history. So I think as artists, when there's a need, artists step forward, at least some of them, if they recognize their abilities and provide a vision of what could be, and the energy and the creativity and the problem solving that will lead us to the next stage in our evolution.
I think when we talk about leadership, it's significant to think about when we were kids, maybe you got a grade for leadership what did it, and those little everyday kinds of acts that it involved, did your own personal responsibility that that helps the rest of society kind of function. I think it's interesting to look at it in the local micro kinds of ways, because if you're making kids aware of what leadership is, taking personal responsibility, being an example, modeling behavior, then that leads to other forms of leadership. Instead of thinking like, oh, I could never be a leader, I don't do anything like anything that I think of as a leader, like the president of the United States or whatever. I think it's important to make kids aware of what leadership qualities are.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, it strikes me that there's the values in some of the first questions are coming into the thoughts in the second question of COVID kind of being this place where everybody's on the same ground. And so we see an opportunity for leadership and for everybody to step up. Sarah or Raul, you have anything to add to that?
I would just say, like, I think it goes back to what I was saying a minute ago, which is like when staying home becomes the most responsible thing a person can do, it kind of shows that it shows where you shift from like doing things for the broader group versus doing things that feel good for yourself in the moment. And so I think in that way, like you were saying, Sarah, like that, like it becomes like something that puts everybody on an equal playing field, right? And an equal kind of plane of like, how do I take responsibility for helping? It sounds kind of intense, but like helping humanity, right? How do we all move through this together and keep one another as safe as possible whenever possible?
I did notice during COVID that our younger staff were looking to the elders for how to respond to this crisis. And it felt really, I mean, I was kind of nervous about that because all I could say was, we've never been through this before, but that was kind of an interesting dynamic too. And how we all were kind of making our way together, really, and how to deal with it.
Yeah, Raul, you want to take a stab at it? Paula, you got.
I'm not sure. I don't really have a thought out answer right now.
Yesterday evening, for some remote chance, I was watching this documentary on the Cold War bomb shelters and bunkers. And as we were having this conversation now, I'm thinking about the similarities between those and COVID and the differences in how people responded between the Cold War, because I'm one of those, okay, hiding up underneath desks, diving into ditches upon the whistle of the teacher, or just trying to prepare oneself for what we thought was an inevitable. And there have been some inevitabilities with COVID, of course, but I think that we're handling this much differently. To me, the bunkers and the bomb shelters were individual acts of self-preservation, okay? Whereas with COVID, this is a collective, and with art, we can be either or both simultaneously, whatever we choose to be, and we can share that in ways that we feel are necessary at the time, or just because we feel it, or need to feel. Okay, so some of us, like myself, I stuff a whole lot until it just like it's brewing to the point of popping. So it's just like I need my art. And so in a way it is both, okay, for working under the egress of COVID. It's like, what can we do for ourselves and what can we do for other people that will help keep us safe and help us evolve as a human race?
Thanks, Paula. Yeah, and I think that the importance of art in our practice, and Ken, I think you've touched a little bit on this next question in the role of the arts in leadership, and particularly leadership in times of change and an opening for transformation. So how does leadership show up in your practice as artists?
I can start with that one. For me, it's, I guess it's pretty direct. I mean, I for a while I was making artwork about other people, like they represented like construction workers and day laborers, and kind of making work where I wasn't necessarily present in the work. But then at a certain point, I realized like, here I am, like I need to be present in the work and put myself and share these stories about myself, because I just felt like, I don't know, as artists, we have platforms and you get to, in a way, say whatever you want to say or share whatever you want to say. And so I felt like I had this sort of a unique perspective on things, where like being a male parent at home with 2 little girls. And then I just felt like, I don't know, okay, let me start over. So sharing these stories about myself, like these personal stories about myself and with my kids, I feel like it was something that I just needed to do. Because before, like I said, before I was making work about being a parent, it was a lot of work about construction and labor. And so when I was making that work, right away, I had artists reach out to me, whether they were sending me emails, messages on Instagram, or talking to me at shows and coming up to me, and how they felt like they could connect with that work because they had someone who worked in that construction field, labor, etc. And once I switched it over to parenting and about being myself as a parent, I felt like way more people started coming up to me and opening up about either similar, having similar stories they could share, or just like remembering the things that their parents taught them. And I felt like it was just I mean, the conversation about construction and labor was important, but I just felt like at a certain point, I mean, it just sounds funny, but like after a while, I just started having people reach out to me and sending me emails and like messages that were very encouraging, telling me like how some of my artwork made them cry, or they felt like it brought up memories that just like that they couldn't share anymore. So I just felt like, wow, this work has a much stronger impact than I couldn't have imagined. And I, like I said, I needed to own up to that and continue to share these stories, because the more I shared them, the more I felt like I said, more and more people, more and more like younger artists would reach out to me and tell me like, hey, yeah, I've been wanting to be an artist, but I didn't think I could do it and be a parent at the same time. And then I didn't think I can, be an artist and also have a job and also start a family. And I just felt like that was like, I don't know, it's kind of sad to hear all these artists like share these things like, well, who's telling you can't do this? And so I just felt like it was, I don't know, I just felt like I'm really lucky to be able to share the work and have so many people reach out to me. And not just even in the art community, like people in the like just like other parents around the community, like they'll recognize me from a painting they've seen somewhere, like, oh yeah, you're that artist parent. And then I'll have these conversations with other parents on the playground. Well, I used to have those, playground conversations pre-COVID, but yeah, I just felt like I was, having these conversations with parents outside of the art world, and I was having conversation with parents inside, the art community. So I just felt like, I don't know, I just let the work speak for itself and let myself, truly be a role model through my artwork. And I guess that's how, it started for me. Yeah.
Thank you.
So just to kind of piggyback on that, I tell a lot of stories to myself, and I believe most of them. And I share this with my students, because my studio practice, early on was a practice of beating myself up and then trying to drag myself back to the canvas or the paper. And that whole boxing match, not only was it not satisfying, but I was my own worst enemy. So my leadership in my studio it's a practice. I work on it every day, and I share it with my students because there may be some valuable things in there. I don't censor. I never censor, and I don't feel pressure to show people the work. So in other words, I can make anything in there. And just having that kind of freedom is really, really powerful, because sometimes stuff needs to just go through you. The other thing I'm really mindful of is that I trust myself in the studio, and I can't trust myself and control myself at the same time. I've got to sort of choose one or the other. So, to me, leadership mirrors that as well. If you trust the people that you're leading with or working with, it's a very different experience than if you're trying to control it. I also know that I'm collaborating with the work. So again, I don't have to control it. I can trust where it's leading me, even if it's leading me to make a painting that has no figures in it. Like, what's that? I always put figures in my paintings. And then, finally, I speak to myself kindly about my work. I really do, which does not mean that I'm not critical. One of the main things that I talk to students about on the very first day is the difference between self-criticism and self-abuse. And self-criticism involves fairly critiquing yourself. In other words, using words that you might even use for somebody else, right? Like, if I put more time into this, I could get better results. If I knew how to draw hands better, I could do this. If, these possibilities, if I shift this could happen. Self-abuse is a whole other thing. That's me saying my work will never be as good as Raoul's. That doesn't make any sense. And I can feel when self-criticism happens by how my body feels, and this like horrible spiral that then takes me out of my creative game. So, being self-critical and being curious about whatever will happen when I show up in the studio is a way for me to practice healthy self-leadership and to model that for my students and for others.
Thanks, Gina. Ken or Sarah?
Well, going back to my original statement, which condensed down talks about making connection, building harmonious relationships, and lifting up hidden meaning. We all do that when we make artwork. If you boil it all down, that's what we do in various different ways. Then had allowed me 2 decades ago to start thinking in broader strokes that my art and what I felt was relevant could be many things. And that became developing a program with a heavy dose of teaching with individuals that haven't had the access and the means or the resources to develop a creative voice. And with that voice comes self-empowerment and leadership. So I tend to dwell on a much broader definition. That said, I am retiring, and part of my mission is to maybe make a few more monoprints than I used to. So I'll kick it back to you, Sarah, if you're inclined.
In terms of leadership and my art practice, I think that I have these two aspects of my work, which is kind of my educational practice, where I'm working with other folks and we're all teaching together, or I'm training them to be teachers. And so it shows up in that way. I don't really have even though there are like two kind of zones to my work, I really see the connection between the making work that I do and the work in the classroom that I do as being very closely knit together. And so in that way, I and then present with my work when I'm making it, or being present with people when we're working together. I think especially during COVID, it can feel hard to be present, right? And because there's so many things going on. So I've really tried to be mindful of that. And then I think also like being like in the studio, being vulnerable to ask again, maybe that hard question or open yourself up. being, I think a lot of times we think of like leadership as this strong presence, or at least that's what it's kind of like conveyed like in the media, like it's the strong person who comes in and makes the immediate decision, and everything's solved perfectly, but that's really how things work out in real life. I think, again, we've seen that in the last year, that there's not always an immediate quick solve to something. And so how do you go back and you ask more questions, like keep searching for the answer, keep pushing for something. And then I think that happens like in a painting practice or a drawing practice or making practice and in a person's everyday educational work. So that's where I would kind of settle that.
Thank you all. So I think
may I step in for a moment?
Oh, sure. Do you have a follow-up question? Sure thing.
Well, yes. And I know that it's time for me to speak because my heart is beating a little fast and my hands are a little sweaty. So I know you're really focusing on the panelists, and I would like to make a contribution to this conversation because it's resonating with me. I'm Stacy McFarland. I'm an acupuncturist and an educator, and I have a background in the theater arts. And what I consider to do in the treatment room and in my classroom is healing arts as much as creative arts. So I completely see that there's an artificial line between those two, but there's no real difference between the creative and the healing arts. And so what really comes up for me in terms of how does leadership show up in my practice? So I start from the premise with my patients and with my students that each one of us has everything we need to become ourselves, to heal ourselves, to discover and to truly live who we are in the fullest way possible. That's where I begin. So my job then in the treatment room and in the classroom is to start from there, and I deeply listen. So I'm just sort of breaking down. I'm thinking about this question, like, what do I actually do and how does leadership show up? So a lot of it starts from deeply listening. And then the next thing is to actually reflect back to that person, the gifts that I see in them or the questions that I see in them. So I don't see myself as the expert in knowing anything about that person. They're actually teaching me how to be with them, how to treat them, that they know how to heal themselves. And I'm co-collaborating with them. I'm co-navigating with them how to do this. And even as I'm on my own path, as Sarah said, being very vulnerable in my own path of self-discovery. So being in practice, as Gina also said. So what that requires of me as the practitioner is to be really solid in myself. And so my master Qigong teacher says that we need to be 3 steps ahead of the people that we're working with or that we're teaching. So what does that mean is that for me is self-cultivation is absolutely top-notch, number 1. And whatever that means for each one of us. So for me to feel solid in myself, now I can be with somebody else and do a kind of co-collaboration in order to, as Gina was saying, to help folks discover their own sense of who they are, their own sense of inner leader. I use very often in my classroom, particularly the image of the pebble in the pond. That each one of us is a pebble, and if whatever pebble we throw, our ways of doing, our ways of being, our ways of speaking, have impact and really, really matter, how we think, how we be, how we speak. And each one of those pebbles in the pond has resonance into life and goes beyond even what we can see as the edge of the pond, right? So it's important in my perspective that I keep that perspective, that I'm connected to everything that's around me as well. And the last thing I'm thinking about is I'm thinking about dolphins and pod consciousness. So dolphins, you may know this already, dolphins, no matter where they are in the ocean, if they're in a pod, they know where everybody else is. And the other dolphin could be miles and miles away, but they know, they have this consciousness that they are so connected that everybody knows where everybody is. And the question about how has leadership changed in the midst of COVID, this to me is hopefully coming more and more in play, that we're less distracted by outward things, and we're going more inside so that we can find that connection, heart to heart, person to person, soul to soul. And again, whether in the creative arts, the healing arts, it really is, to me, all the same. So thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Yeah, and kind of bringing it into another practice kind of segues into the next question, which I think some of you have touched on in this idea. I think Raul was talking about parents, and Sarah and Ken, you also talked about teaching. But what do you see the role of creativity and artists in impacting more broadly ideas of leadership and leaders in other industry or institutions or, you know, politics? Nobody wants to kick this one off.
So I am a little bit, I get a little bit nervous before any of these things, and I wrote down notes for myself. And since Sarah was kind enough to give us the questions in advance, I wrote down a note that said, creativity is essential in sharing the experience of a moment. It acts as a marker to learn from, to reflect on, and to feel. So like, that's kind of my initial kind of thoughts on it. I'm still kind of working out the rest, but I think creativity is essential to every aspect of any kind of life. But I come at that from the artist perspective, so I know that I'm a little bit biased in that way. But I don't think we can say that it's not essential in almost any form of business or in a classroom space. Like, creativity can make or break the effectiveness of understanding curriculum, for instance. But I don't know, like, I'm still kind of marinating on it.
I'm not a big fan of the word aesthetic or aesthetics and all that they've meant to Western canon for how many thousands of years. I exaggerate a little. But the whole idea that artists construct a logic that translates somehow into beauty, that all the parts make sense, and that people recognize that sense and that beauty, that, I mean, how does that not translate into the rest of the world? If you can carry at least that pursuit or that interest or that desire or that love, I would call that love. And as Sarah has mentioned, a full investment in the moment, that's borders on the spiritual, which we don't usually use with art making, especially within the secular institutions or academies. But there's a lot going on there, and there's problem solving, but there's also some higher pursuit that can translate in many ways.
I think also leadership demands imagination, right? Because it's to me, leadership isn't like steel. It's more like water or something, that can blow in the breeze. It's always being refined. And it seems to me that any kind of leadership, whether it's parenting or in the classroom or I've never been the head of a corporation or the head of, a state or a nation, but inviting others to participate and to imagine or reimagine or reconfigure, that's what artists do all the time. It's what in many ways, we're born for this. We're born for COVID, because we can look at what's available and recombine it. We're scrappy. We can use whatever we have at hand. Yeah, I think about little kids, and I'm sure I've told this story a bazillion times, but it always amazes me that little kids, when they first get paint and they mix red and yellow together, the delight at creating orange, you know, like there's this craziness that something unbelievable has just happened. And I think, you know, as adults, we can lose that. I think as artists, we create a safe space for that wonder and imagination and possibility and, oh, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, right? I mean, we dream up stuff that's never been invented before, and then we make it happen. Or we collaborate with a bunch of people that are all coming together, and somehow we create something that hums. You know, I think that is a leadership, type of leadership that I've been hungry for. And that, you know, again, the gift of COVID is creating a space for this kind of leadership to happen.
Definitely. I don't have much to add other than I definitely agree that creativity is part of, like, I feel like creativity is part of every thought process that comes into play in leadership, because no matter what, you're trying to figure something out. You're trying to make something work. You're trying to work with others, and that all involves a creative thought process to figure out what you need to do next. And I think often the creative process tries to get people try to dissociate it with so many things, but then it's really part of everything. I mean, every science article I've read recently about the landing on Mars, that all came from creative thought process and trying, you know, coming up with these wild ideas and then making them realistic. And then we're doing that on a regular basis. We may not be trying to land on Mars, but we're all finding ways to make our creative thoughts turn into something, you know, yeah, that's it.
Thank you all. I do have one or two more questions, but I want to make sure if there's any questions from those who are joining us today, we make space for all of you. So if there's any questions for the panel you'd like to ask.
I have a question. I know you said I should use the chat box, but this will be faster.
Oh yes, no, now this is, yep, go ahead.
I'm interested in the idea of whether you all work with the dead at all, since they seem more plentiful than ever, at least in my life. I've just noticed as a musician, and since COVID, not being able to perform, I do have a radio show, which is a big comfort. So at least I can share the music that I love. But not being able to work with my band has really been quite an interesting experience in one of those weird sci-fi things of like, okay, what if everything went away? Then what? You know, sort of the little kid in Home Alone. Well, I wish I didn't have a family. I would have to deal with all this crap, you know, and then it all goes away. And all my students go away, you know, and all of the things that I have cultivated my leadership doing go away. And I've become somebody who talks to the dead. And I'm just curious whether that's something you all work with at all. Thank you. I love this event.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if this counts as talking to the dead, but you know, a couple of weeks before we got things shut down, my husband passed after you know, pretty, I know this is a sort of a funny pairing of words, but a hearty illness, like, oh my goodness. Anyway, you know, the death experience, I'll say, invited me to step into a different place in leadership, because rather than being shoulder to shoulder, you know, there wasn't that. So that would be one thing. And then the other thing that I've been super aware of is that, you know, and I think this is part of from that idea of being like this, like, and not that I don't, I mean, I feel very loved. I have amazing friends. I have everything that I need, but there's a moment where like a part of your life disappears. And in this case, 2 times where I've thought, you know, what would my parents do? So I do talk to the dead more. And I'm also mindful of this, I guess, like, you know, that feeling where you could fall over and you know you'd be caught. I'm not physically falling over, but I can say that I'm very aware of the weight of the people that went before me, behind me. So I feel like now is the time to step into the leadership, you know, in whatever way, in the day-to-day ways that Sarah's talking about, which make up everything. And you know, believing in myself enough to take those steps forward. It's, you know, a lot of it is about the people behind me.
Thanks, Gina. Anybody else want to add anything? Thanks, Annie, for the question. I think if anybody else, does anybody else have a question? Because otherwise I will segue that to my last question, I think. I'll give folks a couple more minutes. Yeah, because I think this, for me, thinking about this space, that like the world is completely different now, and the lack of kind of what we've experienced before kind of makes me think a lot about like where we are and at what point in life we're experiencing this thing. So kind of my closing question for the panel is kind of, what are your hopes for the next generation of creative leaders?
I think many of us here are working with the next generation, and I'm excited and energized by them. I feel like, yes, you know, they're going to come in here, they're going to do what needs to be done. There's a strong component of activism and involvement in social justice issues that when I was coming up as an artist in the 80s or so, that wasn't such a foremost thought. So I'm really energized by it and excited to see what they're going to do and what they are doing already.
Yeah, and I honestly just look forward to the next generation of creatives to continue to be, you know, less timid, and to just feel like they can totally put themselves out there, and at the same time, not to worry about having someone walk you along your path to get wherever you need to be. Like, just I hope that a lot of younger artists find like initiative and drive within themselves to be able to start a lot of things on their own. I see it happening now. I see it happening plenty, especially here in San Antonio. There's a lot of young artists who are working together in collectives. They're not worrying about getting a gallery space. They're just finding spaces together and doing stuff. And some of them are having success. And I think it's really great. And I hope that I continue just to see more and more of that, of artists just breaking ground themselves and doing things, and honestly, like changing the way the system works. Totally. I would love to see that. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I would like to see the next generation believed, you know, that things need to change and they need to change now. And I'd like to see them supported by middle-agers and up, and also funded. You know, I think one of the ways that middle-agers and up can participate more actively in leadership is by funding our youth, you know, in every way that you can, and sharing your resources, not competing, but rather cultivating the next generation of leaders, because we need them. And we need them now. And, you know, because I get to work with so many teens and 20s, I am so excited about our future. I will, you know, knock on wood, get to be an old lady with these folks at the helm. And, you know, that to me is, it's just super exciting. It's super exciting.
I would second that kind of like funded kind of statement. Like I wrote down and again in my notes, given what they need to manifest that next phase of leadership and to kind of explode out all the creative things that they're thinking about. So much of the struggle at the beginning of any kind of project, whether it's creative or it's activism based, is that organizing aspect and getting what you need to get the information out there, get the word out there. So I just hope that that as the younger leaders come up, that that people of all walks of life and all ages are like, we hear this, we're supporting you, let's all do this together, but you're at the front of the line, you're leading the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, we have a really rich generation of artists who are more than willing and able to critique our leaders. I hope over time, more of these individuals step into leadership roles to become the critiqued and all that comes with that.
Thank you all. Thank you, Ken, Gina, Sarah, and Raul for being on the panel. Thank you all for joining us tonight. There are 3 more events connected with looking at leadership. Tomorrow is actually our student leader panel organized by Grace Cross, who's on the call. Grace, did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, tomorrow, Sarah and I, Sarah will be moderating the panel, and we got student leaders from various different leadership positions on campus to talk about how leadership affects them and also connecting it back to the show. So they'll be looking at your pieces and pulling information and inspiration from how your pieces representing leadership also inspired them and their own leadership on campus.
Yep, so join us for that tomorrow at 4:30. Thursday, we'll be doing a how-to process talk with Benjamin Jansowitz, and Friday, we'll be having our closing panel that will be moderated by Christy Zaccarini, who started Made in Isolation, talking about making during COVID. So join us for those of you can. All the information is at gormleygallery.com. And Jen, do you want to say anything as we close out?
That's all. Just thank you so much. And I think, as I've said before with this show, leadership, this theme was not only so perfect for this moment in a history that we're living through, but for Notre Dame as an institution, it's part of our university mission to cultivate leaders. And so it's been really wonderful to have these conversations in addition to having your art on the wall and hear these different perspectives about leadership. And I share your optimism about the generation, the younger generation, and how they're going to step into these roles. And I think too, this idea of collectivity that, we're all experiencing on a global scale right now, this need to take care of each other, and thinking about how that's really going to just change this whole generation's, not change. I mean, I think they already had a lot of that in them, but how that's going to really impact the way they lead. And I look forward to that too. So thanks for affirming that, that feeling I have as somebody who teaches these younger students. And thanks for sharing all of your views.
Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for being here again.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer.